A very warm welcome everyone to my channel Runes of Risk, where we decode today's most urgent cybersecurity and risk management challenges one rune at a time. I'm Rashmin Sanvatsarkar, and in this short breakdown, we are going to expose one of the most dangerous yet frequently overlooked flaw in how organizations assess vendor risk. So let's get started. Every organization does risk assessments. Most review their vendors as well, collect documentation, and tag risks properly in a register. But despite all that, breaches still happen. Why is that? Because there is one critical blind spot almost everyone misses, and it is still costing organizations in millions. On paper, most assessments look complete. Vendors are reviewed, security questionnaires are filled, SOC 2 reports are collected. Risks get tagged at medium and marked as handled. Everything seems fine until the next breach happens. Change Healthcare. What happened? Breach through a payment processor they trusted. MOVEit, a vendor you never even contracted, still breached your data. Okta, exploited through a forgotten support channel. Target, breached by their HVAC vendor. SolarWinds, compromised through a software update pipeline. Different industries, different entry points, but a common failure. The assessments didn't cover what really mattered. Here is the real gap in most risk assessments. They ask, is the vendor SOC 2 certified? Do they have multi-factor authentication implemented? Did they complete our entire security checklist properly? And when the answers are yes, the vendor gets approved, the risk is logged, and the process moves on. But here is what is missing. What systems and data does this vendor access? And how far does that access go? Can they reach sensitive systems, data stores, or key internal workflows? Do they have access to production systems, customer data, or admin interfaces? What is the impact if they are breached? And what is the blast radius? That is not paperwork, that is real exposure, and too often it is left completely unaccounted for. At the heart of every vendor risk assessment, there is one question that matters the most, and yet it is almost never asked. If this vendor is breached, what part of my business bleeds? Not whether the assessment was done, but whether it uncovered what truly matters: access, exposure, and business impact. That is the question most vendor risk assessments never answer. So, what is the real reason vendor risks get misjudged? Well, assessments often focus on checklists and categories, not on exposure or impact. You collect the documents, the vendor looks compliant, and that's the end of it. But the real risk doesn't show up in filled forms or static documents. They hide in what isn't asked and what isn't mapped. To correct that, you need a different approach grounded in three foundational principles. I call them the runes. Each one aligns to a critical phase in risk management, from identification to analysis to evaluation. Rune 1 is about mapping actual system access. Most teams know who their vendors are. Very few know what systems those vendors can actually touch. It's not just about a list of names. It is about tracing the digital pathways. What applications they connect to, what data they process, what workflows they sit behind. If you don't map that, you can't see what is at stake. Rune 2 is about modeling failure scenarios. Risk isn't just a theoretical probability, it has real world outcomes. What happens if this vendor is breached or misconfigures something critical? Which systems are affected? What data is exposed? What operations would stall? This is where threat modeling comes in for your vendor relationship. Simulate how a failure could unfold. Estimate the impact across systems, services, and even customers. That is risk simulation in practice, and it is the core of meaningful risk analysis. Unless you model vendor breaches and simulate their consequences, you are not assessing risk, you are just logging relationships. Rule 3 is about prioritizing by business impact, not just vendor tier. We have seen tier 3 vendors take down tier 1 systems. So stop rating vendors by contract size, brand value, or category. Rate them by what they could break and how critical it is for your business continuity. This is where true risk prioritization starts, not from the vendor's profile, but from their footprint inside your environment. So, what is the risk blind spot that costs millions? It's not a missed policy, not a forgotten checklist. It is the belief that because you assess the vendor, you have totally understood and mitigated the risk. The assessment got logged, the boxes got checked, but the exposure, unfortunately, it stayed invisible. That's the blind spot, and that is what keeps catching organizations off guard. And until we start mapping accesses, simulating failures, and prioritizing by business impact, we are not managing vendor risk. We are just praying it won't hurt. Thank you for watching this Runes of Risk breakdown. If you found this useful, please like, share, and subscribe to support the series. And stay connected for more insightful videos on cybersecurity and risk.